Hello everyone, it's Scott and welcome to day 4 of Outlaws of Thunder Junction. Spoilers, today we got another pile of cards from Wizards of the Coast, and now we've got almost 200 cards from the set previewed already. So let's dive in and look at the mythics and the rares from today's previews, and then we'll talk about some lower rarity cards at the end. So first we've got Caustic Bronco for 1 and a black mana. You get a Snake Horse Mount. That's a 2/2. And whenever Caustic Bronco attacks, reveal the top card of your library and put it in your hand. You lose life equal to that card's mana value if Caustic Bronco isn't saddled. Otherwise, each opponent loses that much life. So a really interesting card here that I can see you wanting to go ahead and saddle. The saddle cost is high at 3, but I think you'll probably want to do that for that ability to get the card and then do damage to your opponent equal to the mana value of that card. And it could be 4, 5, 6 damage potentially that would be dealt in that way. So I think this is going to definitely have a place in Standard. We'll have to figure out where it works in terms of deck construction for that to happen. Next, we've got Rush of Dread for a colorless and 2 black mana. You get a plus card that's a sorcery with Spree, and you can pay 1 and target opponent sacrifices half the creatures they control, rounded up. You can pay 2 and target opponent discards half the cards in their hand, rounded up. Or for 2, you can target opponent loses half their life, rounded up. So I see this as a really another one of those powerful modal spells that we are getting from the set. And depending on what kind of opponent you're playing, any of those abilities looks like it's a very positive one for you, even if it's going to cost 4 or 5 mana to accomplish that. And certainly in the late game, you can do all of these things, and that would be tremendous for you in that set of circumstances. So I think black decks will try to play at least 1, maybe 2 copies of this, because that ability to potentially have your opponent lose half their life, that for 5 mana seems like a great deal in Standard. Next, we've got Laughing Jasper Flint. For 1, a black and a red mana, you get Lizard Rogue. That's a 4/3. And creatures you control but don't own are mercenaries in addition to their other types. At the beginning of your upkeep, exile the top X cards of target opponent's library, where X is the number of outlaws you control. Until end of turn, you may cast spells from among those cards, and mana of any type can be spent to cast those spells. So this is another one of the more interesting cards from the set. Basically, you get to look at the top cards of your opponent's library, and you get to play them for each, and you can get up to 1 card for each outlaw that you control. So very powerful ability. Basically, you're going to be able to work through your opponent's deck on your turn, which is outstanding. So I'm going to assume that you're going to have no problem, casting spells and doing things on your turn. They're going to really hurt your opponent, and you're going to get to play their deck in addition to yours. So I think this is definitely more than Standard playable, and it looks like Rakdos is going to get some additional support in this set as well, or this may find its way into a Grixis build. Next, we have Ornery Tumblewag. For 2 and a green mana, you get a Brushwag Mount. That's a 2/2. And at the beginning of combat on your turn, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature. Whenever Ornery Tumblewag attacks while saddled, double the number of +1/+1 counters on target creature. So really nice ability. I mean, we've seen this on other cards before, and those cards tend to see play in Standard, so I would assume this is going to see play too. And that ability to double things if you saddle it, I think is fantastic. So for me, it's a no-brainer that this card is going to get played in Standard. Next, we've got Breaches, the Blast Maker. For 1, a blue and a red mana, you get a Goblin Pirate. That's a legendary creature and is a 3/3 with Menace. And whenever you cast your second spell each turn, you may sacrifice an artifact. If you do, flip a coin. When you win the flip, copy that spell. You may choose new targets for the copy. When you lose the flip, Breaches, the Blast Maker, deals damage equal to that spell's mana value to any target. So it's kind of a win-one. Heads you win, tails you win, because you get a copy of the spell if you win the flip, and if you don't, you get to do damage to your opponent equal to the mana value of that card. So Breaches, I think, is definitely a playable card. And again, right now we don't really have a strong Izzet deck in Standard, but this is another card that's pushing us closer to getting an Izzet deck that's, really playable. And we've seen a number of cards from the set have this second spell ability on them. So there's potentially a deck that can be built around those. And we've got other cards of that from other sets as well. So maybe we'll see a deck that's built around that idea of casting 2 spells on a turn. Next, we have One Last Job. For 2 and a white mana, you get a sorcery that has Spree. And for 2 mana, you return target creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield. For 1, you can return target mount or vehicle card from your graveyard to the battlefield. Or for 1, return target or equipment card from your graveyard to the battlefield attached to a creature you control. So again, yes, I like the modal nature of it, but I think the cost of this one is just too high to really make it very standard playable, because to return a creature, it costs 5 mana. To return a mount, or a vehicle, it costs 4 mana. To return or an equipment, it costs 4 mana. And I think that's just too high of a cost given the other cards that we currently have in Standard. Next, we've got Kravek the Punisher. For 1 and 2 black mana, you legendary creature. That's a human warlock. And it's a 3/3. Whenever you commit a crime, exile up to 1 target black card from your graveyard and copy it. You may cast the copy. If you do, you lose 2 life. So another great way of getting cards out of your library and then replaying them. So you go ahead and commit a crime of, you cut something down and you already have a go for the throat in your graveyard. Well, for 2 life and 2 mana, you can go kill something else as well. Or you can maybe play a board wipe from your graveyard if you need to, depending on what's happening on the battlefield. So I like the ability to just go get things if you commit a crime. So I think this is definitely standard playable. Again, where it fits in is going to be the interesting part. Is black going to have a legend style deck? Because there's from this set and from previous sets so many good legends in black that I think there's got to be a deck out there somewhere that can be very competitive with those legendary creatures in it. Next, we have Lila, Undefeated Slick Shot. For 1, a blue and a red mana, legendary creature. That's a human rogue and is a 3/3 with prowess. And whenever you cast a multicolored instant or sorcery spell from your hand, exile that spell instead of putting it into your graveyard as it resolves. If you do, it becomes plotted. So what this is doing is anytime you cast a multicolored spell, you are going to get that to, in essence, copy that spell for free, because that's what it, in essence, is doing here. Because you cast it, it has an effect on the game, and then on the next turn, you can recast it and do it all again. So I think this has a place in Standard. Again, we're getting closer and closer to an Izzet Spellslinger style deck, and I think this is another card that kind of fits into that model. Next, we have Rakdos Joins Up. For 3, a black and a red mana, you get a legendary enchantment. And when Rakdos Joins Up enters the battlefield, return target creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield with 2 additional +1/+1 counters on it. So typical 5 cost, take a card from the graveyard, put it on the battlefield. In this case, you get those 2 additional +1/+1 counters for it, which is a bonus. And then whenever a legendary creature you control dies, Rakdos Joins Up deals damage equal to that creature's power to target opponent. So when your opponent is killing your creatures, they're doing damage to themselves. So I'm not sure this is really standard playable, but it's certainly interesting enough that I would try a couple copies of it in a Rakdos build to see if that ability, when things die that are legendary creatures, that damage that you're going to do because of that is going to be enough to win the game. Next, we have Calamity Galloping Inferno. For 4 and 2 red mana, you get a horse mount. That's a legendary creature and is a 4/6 with haste. And whenever Calamity Galloping Inferno attacks while saddled, choose a non-legendary creature that saddled it this turn and create a tapped and attacking token that's a copy of it. Sacrifice that token at the beginning of the next end step. Repeat this process once. So you get to do this twice in essence. So even though its saddle cost is 1, you can do that 2 times and then make 2 copies of non-legendary creatures that will attack in essence in their place, in addition to Calamity attacking for you as well. Now the downside of this is a 6 mana card. Nowhere in a mono red deck currently would this ever see play because it's just too expensive. So if it's going to see any standard play, it's going to have to be in a deck that really is going to be able to get a lot of mana out and then again gain from the benefit of saddling Calamity to get copies of creatures put in play, and then you get to attack with those as well. Next, we've got Claim Jumper for 2 and a white mana. You get a Rabbit Mercenary. That's a 3/3 with Vigilance, and when Claim Jumper enters the battlefield, if an opponent controls more lands than you may search your library for a Plains card and put it onto the battlefield tap. Then, if an opponent controls more lands than you, repeat this process once. If you search your library this way, shuffle. So great ability there on Claim Jumper to potentially get 2 lands out of your deck and putting them on the field if your opponent has more lands than you do. The problem that I see with this is if you're on the play, you're not likely to see any benefit from Claim Jumper unless you're playing it in the mid to late game and in a deck that has a low land count. So I think while it's a nice concept, I don't think it has much standard playability given what it does. Next, we have Archmage Newt. For 1 and a blue mana, you get a Salamander Mount. That's a 2/2. And whenever Archmage's Newt deals combat damage to a player, target instant or sorcery card in your graveyard gains flashback until end of turn. The flashback cost is equal to its mana cost. That card gains flashback 0 until end of turn instead if Archmage Newt is saddled. So if you're saddling this, you can get damage through, then you're going to be able to cast any instant or sorcery spell from your graveyard for free. So I can see this potentially in a Spellslinger style deck where we're trying to get that flashback, but also the fact that it has to do damage. It's only a 2/2, so I think it's not likely to happen very often, which in my mind means we're not going to see much of Archmage Newt in Standard. Next, we've got Ariette, the Beguiler. For 1, a blue, a white, and a black mana, you get a legendary creature. That's a human warlock. That's a 4/4 with lifelink. And whenever an aura you control becomes attached to a non-land permanent an opponent controls with mana value less than or equal to that aura's mana value, gain control of that permanent for as long as that aura is attached to it. So Ariette's an interesting card. So you really construct your deck around auras that enchant your opponent's creatures. And we do have cards like this in Standard where you're putting something on your opponent and one of its creatures to basically take it out of the ability to block or to attack. So it'll be interesting to see if there's enough of those cards to make this worthwhile in Standard. I like the concept, but I don't really think it's probably going to work for us in Standard. Next, we have Cabal, Profiteering Mare. For 1, a white and a black mana, legendary creature that's a human advisor and is a 2/4. And whenever 1 or more tokens enter the battlefield under your opponent's control, for each of them create a tapped token that's a copy of it. This ability triggers only once each turn. Whenever 1 or more tokens enter the battlefield under your control, each opponent loses 1 life and you gain 1 life. Now, the problem here that I see with this card is it is totally predicated on your opponent doing things that are going to create tokens. But many times we have opponents that you're playing against that are not playing anything that's going to create a token. So I think Cabal is at best a sideboard card in an Orzhov deck. But outside of that, I don't see it seeing main deck play because it's so subjective to get its ability. and a 2/4 for 3 mana that really doesn't do much of anything other than activates when a token enters the battlefield on your side. So you could build a deck around tokens and then maybe possibly get the benefit of your opponent creating tokens. But I just don't think that's really standard playable, and that's asking a lot out of a deck. Next, we've got another round for XX and 2 and a white. You get to exile any number of creatures you control, then return them to the battlefield under their owner's control. Then repeat this process X more times. So you're going to do this at least once, and what will happen is you can reset your board in essence. And I can see that after a combat phase, it might be something nice that you would want to do, or if your opponent has placed an aura on one of your creatures that is, giving it a cursed roll or something like that. But outside of that, I don't know if this is really standard playable, because you would have to have a dedicated deck where you want to, in essence, flicker your own cards. And we really don't have that right now in standard. Doesn't mean that one couldn't exist, but I don't see it right now. Next, we have Stoic Sphinx for 2 and 2 blue mana. You get a creature that's a Sphinx, that's a 5/3 with flash and flying, and Stoic Sphinx has hexproof as long as you haven't cast a spell this turn. So basically what you're probably doing with this is you flash it on your opponent's turn, maybe during their end step. It's going to have hexproof on your turn when you go to your turn, and the result of that is you can attack with it and hopefully do some serious damage, and your opponent can't use spot removal to kill it. So from that side of it, I like the concept of it, but again, 5/3 with flash, I mean, it's in blue, it's a very good rate for it, but I don't know if we have a blue deck that's going to want a creature like this as of right now. Maybe in the future we will. So I think there's some standard playability, but again, it's going to be all about finding the right deck for it. All right, and those are our Mythic and Rares for today from the Outlaws of Thunder Junction. And I'm going to go ahead and do a separate video that'll deal with the commons and the uncommons. So stay put. I'll be back with another video for you that's going to cover those in just a minute. Thanks for staying to the end of the video, and I'll see you next time.